Parents should also be in the driver's seat when it comes to opportunity and choice. Every student deserves a shot at success, and no child should be shackled to a failing school.
The great debate: how, when, and where to educate your kids. This is Raising America on the Hill. I'm your host, Elizabeth Prann. The numbers don't lie. Look at 2024. More than 4 million kids were being homeschooled. That's about a 62% jump if you look at the numbers prior to March of 2020, which was right around 2.6 million. And this on the backdrop of the Trump administration essentially dismantling the Department of Education.
We had a big win with the Supreme Court on the Department of Education. We want, as you know, we want to bring education back to the states, take the federal government out of it. A little tiny bit of supervision, but very little, almost nothing, like to make sure they speak English. That's about all we need.
And while you may think it falls up and down party lines, it's actually much more complicated.
This idea that the parents can, maybe should, or, I will say can or should be the ones who educate the child, or at least fundamentally responsible for it. That's pretty ecumenical politically. Everyone can agree with that.
School choice, public versus private, funding from Washington. States are feeling strapped. You've got class sizes and ratio requirements. Being in a classroom is very complex, and politics makes parenting much more complicated than it needs to be. In this episode, we're going to speak with a former educator who is also an author who wrote a topic just on this, and a mother who has both homeschooled her children and sent them in person, because sometimes the answers are just somewhere in the middle. Hannah Brandt joins us first. Hannah, just to give our viewers some expectations, I'm going to backpedal a little bit because we're talking so much about the homeschool versus the private or the public school debate, but this is on a very timely headline that we're seeing, and you've been reporting on it for NewsNation. Essentially, we're seeing test scores across the board at really, really low rates. So give me an overview of what you've learned when you're reporting on this.
Yeah, Elizabeth, the scores are out. These latest scores from what's known as like the nation's report card is what it's called. So it's this kind of nationally recognized standard. And the scores, the testing, it's not good. It doesn't say good things about where students stand right now. And the significant thing about this is this tested students last year in 2024. The last time they did similar testing in these categories was 2019. So that was pre-pandemic. So this is kind of the first look we're getting at post-pandemic test scores from students. And of course, it was predicted that this was going to make a difference, that the pandemic was going to cause learning loss. That's shown in these test scores. But a really interesting thing that the experts are saying is the downward trend was happening before the pandemic. So this is really just a continuation of a decline in academics.
That was one of the things that I noticed in the reporting so far. Of course, it depends on what you're reading and what you're consuming. But as a parent, I'm looking at all these headlines and finger pointing, right? Finger pointing to the Biden administration, finger pointing to COVID-19. And then at the end of the story, if I do my own research, it's been on the decline for over a decade. So kind of set that up for me. Who's pointing the finger at who? And do we really know what is to blame?
Yeah, lots of finger pointing here, and we're hearing concern across the board, across the aisle. Republicans and Democrats say this report is troubling. We're not excited about these testing, but they have different explanations for what's going on here. And from the Republican administration, the Trump administration, we've heard this says we're on the right track. This says to us that federal control isn't working, that we should give control back to local and state governments. And that's something we've heard the Trump administration say all along, right? Education Secretary Linda McMahon has basically said, I'm going to try and work myself out of a job because President Trump is trying to eliminate the education department. But then Democrats are looking at this and they're saying education is in crisis. The Trump administration wants to cut federal resources at a time when actually we should be investing in academics at the federal level.
I think why that is so important is because you're right. And I've covered stories similar. I actually lived in Atlanta, Georgia, worked at the network level in 2010. There was a huge cheating scandal back then. It was a long time ago. It was in the Atlanta public school system, but it was all over national headlines. So there was so many people who wanted to throw more money at the Atlanta public school system. And then others who said, no, if we remove money, federal money, then the state and local, there'll be more competition. So my question to you is just what you're observing, because what you're going to hear in West Virginia, the support they get from the federal level, is going to be different from what you're going to hear from parents in Atlanta, Georgia. So, what should parents know? Let's say they live in a very small district. If we do see that elimination of the federal support.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the bottom line here is the Trump administration is in charge, right? So they're going to push ahead with their plans to take away the federal funding. But they say, like you pointed out, state and local governments should lead on this. They should fill in the gaps. And their argument is we're not taking away funding. We're just giving more control to state and local governments. Democrats have kind of like a different take on it. They're like, well, no, in this budget, you are cutting federal funds. So that is going to take away resources from the state and local governments who may not be able to supplement the money on their own. So you're right. It does depend where you live. State and local governments have the capacity to handle lapses in funding differently. Some may be able to make up for it if the federal government takes away money and funds. Others might not be able to. And that's a real concern that Democrats have been raising here at the national level.
Well, we talk a lot about finger pointing, and you brought up COVID. And I also hear a lot of parents say it's also the cell phones, right? It's also social media. There's simply more distractions that my 10-year-old daughter is going to face because I didn't have a cell phone, right? So are you hearing a lot of lawmakers say, let's also remind parents that it's a different world that we're living in, so we need to adjust?
That's sort of in the background here. I think to your point, though, we are seeing a lot of finger pointing at the former administration, at the COVID issue. A lot of lawmakers do want to make this political. That's inherent in what they do always, right? And so we heard the top Republican on the House Education Committee say, yeah, this proves that the Biden administration was wrong to keep schools closed during the pandemic. He's, pointing the finger right at them, saying these test scores, they're directly to blame for them. But then like we said, the decline was happening before. So there's clearly a larger problem at play. And we've certainly heard lawmakers raise concerns about things like phones, AI in classrooms, and how that's impacting the whole education landscape, because it is way more complicated than it was 5-10 years ago to be in a classroom today. And that's something that they've been talking about. But on Capitol Hill, we've always seen lawmakers slow and at times reluctant to rein in technology. And so that's something they're kind of grappling with at this level. They haven't come forward with like comprehensive laws on things like AI or cell phones in classrooms. And, that might not be something that we'll see at a national level. It's certainly not a push that's gained traction.
Well, and in the panel that we're going to be listening to next, you hear experts say there's so much focus on policy and policy, when maybe that's not really getting to the root of the problem, which leads me to my next question is, are you hearing real solutions on ways that we can move forward? If I were to ask you at the end of the day, we got this report, it wasn't great. Are you hearing real solutions from lawmakers? Because when we throw more money on it, we throw more policy at it. If you look at the past 10 years, you can't say that the grades are improving, right?
Sure. I think a lot of lawmakers on the Democratic side have said, we're not funding our classrooms enough. And it's not so much that they think there's like a one size fits all learning plan that we can put on states, but rather they say states have been underinvesting in teacher salaries. Classrooms have been getting bigger. We're not investing enough in after school programs, things that they say we know work in classrooms. The federal government is taking money away from those sorts of things rather than putting money into it. And on the Republican side, they've said exactly that. Money can't fix the problem. We should just stop throwing federal dollars at this. It doesn't work. In fact, Secretary McMahon, in reaction to these testing scores, said this shows it's not about how much money we spend. It's about how we spend it and who's in charge of those dollars. So again, just like making the case that local governments know their school systems, know their students best, and they should be in charge.
Right. Big takeaway from parents before I let you go. What are you hearing from parents? Obviously, I know you were busy talking to lawmakers and looking at policy and hearing from the secretary, but what are parents feeling right now when they look at this? It's a little bit disheartening, right? We want our kids to get better test scores than we got.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway across the board is concern. This is not where anyone wants the nation's students to be. And the numbers basically show, at all of these levels, under a third or rather only a third of students in these certain categories are at just like very basic levels of understanding. And that means 2/3 of students are unprepared. And no one's excited about seeing something like that.
And I know I said it was my last question, but was there certain groups that were disproportionately affected? Before I let you go, I was going to ask you, is it we're seeing these grades across the board, just some of the micro levels on this report?
Yes, when it came to races and ethnicities, that was pretty consistent across the board, consistent scoring. But the lowest achieving students were even lower achieving than they had been in past levels. So basically, the gap is widening. The lower students are performing at lower levels than they had before, while others are kind of staying stagnant. And so that's bringing the entire average scores down. And that widening gap is another concern, too, because it goes to show, if these middle students are still kind of doing the same, why are these lower achieving students falling behind?
Absolutely. Hannah Brandt, thank you so much. As I mentioned, we have a panel coming up. We have former educator who's going to talk to us about things that he's learned. He's even written a book about it. And then a mom who has homeschooled her kids and then also put them in the public school system and then some in private. So we have that coming up for parents. But thank you, Hannah. I'm grateful for you. Excellent reporting. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for both of you joining us today. We have Daniel Buck. He is of the American Enterprise, formerly an assistant principal and also working at the Fordham Institute. And then we have Ashley Barnhart. She is a mother of three, a business owner. The reason we have her on the show today also is because she can speak from experience. Not only did she homeschool her sons, but she also put them in person. So she's even done a combination of it all. So we're going to pick her brain a little bit. So Daniel, I want to start with you. When we look at some of the statistics, how did we get here? Because we look at the millions of kids who are currently being homeschooled. Politics bleeds into parenting, right? And there's actually millions more who are being homeschooled when we thought in 2020 we had reached a peak.
Yeah, so the numbers have doubled essentially since pre-pandemic. And if you look at the surveys on why families are choosing to homeschool, I mean, it's all over the map. The number one reason is school environment. It's a pretty vague term, but that includes things like peer pressure or negative peer pressure, drugs in the building, school safety, the content that students are actually learning. Its school environment is far and away the number one reason. And then along after that, I mean, pretty close, all tied together, things like wanted to have a more virtuous and religious themed education, wanting to spend more time together as a family, maybe a more specific case where a student has kind of an illness or some condition that doesn't really make a system school work very well for them. Interestingly, if you look also at why do parents choose any option for school other than public school, so if that's private, if that's charter, if that's homeschooling, if that's microschooling, anything else, any of these other options, it's safety. Parents just don't feel safe sending their kids into a building, if it's because the local building has lots of fights, if it's the headline grabbing atrocities, school shootings like this. Parents are really concerned about just what their kids are going to encounter when they walk through those doors. If it's a curriculum that they don't agree with, if it's other students that kind of pressure them in a bad way, or if it's just straight up physical harm.
So Ashley, what did you go through? I mean, you've got three boys, and I'm very respectful. I only have two because I have a girl, but why wouldn't you want to get them out of the house? I mean, what did you grapple with back in 2020? Because it wasn't just one factor, and Daniel just listed off at least 10 that we're faced with every single day.
Sure. Well, we started in 2020, like everybody else, with remote learning, and we're in a world-class school system here in our town and our city rather. And I was sitting off camera watching my kids learn and realizing that they weren't learning. And I thought, I have one opportunity. My oldest was in third grade at the time. And I go, I can't, as a parent with my eyes open, sit back and let them fall behind. And that was my biggest concern at the time. They were relatively young, and I thought these are fundamental years. I had a kindergartner as well, and we did stuff at home. I'm an engaged mom. I'm an engaged parent in general, but we just thought, okay, we're going to give this till October. I don't want to be super critical with it. We have a great school system. The teachers didn't get an opportunity. They didn't learn how to do this, just go easy on them. And excuse me, we got to the end of October and they just weren't learning. And you can blame a lot of different people, and I learned a lot more about it as I got involved with the school district and started asking questions and learning about it. But it was just one of those things that you go, okay, I have an opportunity here. And I know a lot of parents had to make that call, and a lot of, like, I had to choose between, am I going to continue working full time and giving my company 10% of me and my kids 10% of me and my, like all of these different things, small little bits, or do I take a break, pause my career, pause our livelihood, scale back, change everything financially about what we're doing because my kids matter? And we did. And you have to make those calls for your own family. But that was the biggest thing for us, was making that decision. And also we have, our oldest is on the autism spectrum. So it was one of those things that he was not thriving in this environment at all.
Ashley, I was reading a piece of Daniel's book, It's What's Wrong with Our Schools. And it's almost as if we focus so much on things like policy or class size. And I want to toss it back to Daniel, because are we focusing on the right things? Like what Ashley was saying is, do I continue on this trajectory? What am I focusing on? What are we focusing on right now when we just look at education?
Yeah, I don't think we are focused on the right things. I overheard a conversation recently among parents who were, my local school district has a reputation now for regular fights. The test scores are tanking. There's this just wildly inappropriate curriculum. And the parents were talking about how great our local school system is, because a lot of times they just don't know. When I worked in a lot of choice schools, sometimes parents, despite working in a great school, a classical school, parents wanted to opt out of the choice school because they wanted to focus on football or they wanted prom. We're very focused on the aesthetic things, and too few people are focused on, like, what are the kids actually learning? What books are in their hands? Are they learning to read and do math? And we're so busy discussing just the latest policy fad, and not actually talking about what are kids learning and are they actually learning.
Ashley, I mean, I know you can comment on this because you've sat through on those school board meetings, right? So when you listen to them, when you listen to the administrators, what are they focused on? Are they focused on class size? Because even Daniel has evidence where we focus so much on it, and it's really not necessarily indicative. It's how we're teaching them, right? So when you go to those meetings, what are you hearing as a parent?
So I was heavily involved between 2021 and 2023, going as far as winning a lawsuit against our school district, filing a writ of mandamus with the Ohio Supreme Court, definitely learning a lot and the ins and outs of what goes on. And different districts do have different priorities. So I can speak to ours. However, you do see a trend amongst districts, and ours spent $600,000 a year on social emotional testing. That's it, and just to find out if, and what we saw with the data, by the way, was no change. Year after year after year after year, there was no change. So you're going, why are we spending time and money on this when we could be investing it back into our kids' education? When, 37% of the third graders aren't passing the third grade reading guarantee, there's a problem here. And there is definitely a stigma. I can speak to what I saw on the front lines with parents here. You have parents who are calling you saying, I really want to see change, but I don't want to stick my neck out. I don't want anyone to know. I don't want the school district. And I'm quoting parents, hundreds of parents coming to me saying, I don't want the district to retaliate against my first grader. I'm going, if you're concerned that the school district's going to retaliate against your first grader, you've got bigger problems. Like, this is very concerning. You need to pull your kids, like, get them out. And of course, there's the question of, oh, I can't do that. I can't homeschool. And then, we can discuss that, but it's definitely a priority. People are very concerned about making sure that they're invited to the country club party, so that, they don't want to make any waves, and your kids are going to pay the price of it.
That's my question, Daniel, with all your experience. I mean, you were an assistant principal and you did research when you were writing the book. Is, well, then how these parents care about their kids. We care about our children. So how do we go about with reform, with change?
I think an important thing to keep in mind, kind of to frame this conversation, is that ultimately the parents have the greatest impact on a student's outcome. I experience it all the time as both a teacher and an administrator. I worked in schools, both public and a classical charter school. In the public school, we used curriculum that was not great, instructional methods that weren't very good, and the classical school was amazing. But go into both of those schools, and the difference in students who had, parents that read to them before bedtime, parents that put phones away and spent time together as a family, parents that brought their kids to the museum or kind of in these enrichment side activities, parents that had family dinners together and talked with their kids and asked how the day was going. Ultimately, it really comes down to parent engagement and parent involvement. That being said, schools aren't a non-factor, right? If you send your kid to a bad or a good school, it's going to make a difference. So some of the policies that we should be looking at are school choice in giving parents kind of an exit valve, introducing a bit of competition. Choice schools not only themselves do better, but that competition actually makes traditional public schools improve. We can talk about curriculum reform. So we're spending more money on good history, science, and literature curriculum and not kind of the latest fuzzy, happy clappy SEL, whatever the trendy thing is right now. Instructional reform, making sure teachers are using instructional practices that are actually effective. There's a lot that we can be doing, but too often it's not very sexy. It doesn't sell well, right? Renovating the gym, buying a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, Chromebook, iPad policy is easy for a politician or district superintendent to sell, saying, hey, we're going to get better textbooks and improve teacher practice. Like that just doesn't sell. So it's hard to really implement and get a movement behind it.
So if we're seeing whatever it is, 3.7 million kids getting homeschooled right now, I mean, are we just going to see that number growing? I mean, Ashley, it's not easy, right? You have to sacrifice, you essentially put your career on hold.
You put your career, your sanity, a lot of the days on hold for sure. Homeschooling is one of those things that I hear so many parents say, I could never do that. And the
Right.
reality is, if you trust your government schools to educate your children, well, didn't you go through the government schools? So shouldn't you really be qualified according to what you believe is the standard to educate your children? I mean, you've been through it, right? If you're going to argue that point. But the reality is, children have been at home since the dawn of time, learning from their parents. And we're not looking for parents to provide an education that is, a doctoral level education. We're looking for parents to be engaged, teaching your kids to read, things that they should be doing, even if you are sending your kids to school. And this is going to upset a lot of parents because so many rely on iPads to parent. This is why you can't take your kids to restaurants or on flights, because they don't know how to behave, because if they don't have a screen in front of them, they can't interact and function. This is going to be a problem in the long run. But when it comes to homeschooling, it is very engaged. It isn't Little House on the Prairie, though. Like, let's be honest. It's 2025. We have access to curriculum that we've never had access to in the history of home education or education in general. And you can pick and choose what aligns with your family. So if you want secular education, you can have secular education. Not everything is Bible-based conservative education. And there are just copious amounts of support groups. And I mean, besides podcasts and just education for the parent who's doing education at home, but you have co-ops and groups and everybody. Of course, there's the question of how do you get your kids to, be with other kids. We don't live under a rock,
Right.
we're involved with sports and scouts and, various sundry things. And it's very closed-minded to think that homeschoolers are, living at home with the doors locked and they're never allowed to see their peers and there's no bullying. I have 3 boys. They bully each other hard, we have a very typical experience. And again, we have friends who go to homeschool, other homeschool kids in our lives, and we have kids who are private school kids, and everybody. And, we can be able to travel. That's one of the amazing things that we've been able to do, like live in another country. So we have friends who live, in Mexico and Canada and Australia and Germany. Anyway, so I could go on about that, but homeschooling is one of those things that it's Scary because you are taking something major into your own hands, but you're doing it, and you are, you know what they're learning, you know where you, and you also know your kids. So like I have one who needs more of one thing and another who needs, more of another thing, and you can take that time and do that with them. And also for the parents who have to work full time or have to work around a schedule, maybe you work part time, it can be done at off hours. You don't have to follow the typical school schedule. You can do it on the weekends. You can do it in the summer. You can do it in the evenings. You can do it like, it's just way more flexible. And also, I mean, we can talk about the importance of sleep for children and brain
Right.
development and just so much, there's so much that goes into it, that there are benefits to it, outside of just, not having to deal with school shootings, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another thing, the safety. Daniel brought it up, and the rigidity of the schedule. Daniel, Ashley made me think of two things. The first one, of course, not popular. Our kids are addicted to screens. I mean, that's been a theme throughout a number of our interviews that we are airing and will continue to air on this program. But also the politics of it. So, Daniel, I want to put you in the very uncomfortable position of telling me sort of where you're seeing it falls up and down political lines. Because you could say back in 2020 and afterwards, right, there was a pushback with the critical race theory, and people wanted to pull it out because of book bans. But really there's just so many reasons, and now it's not necessarily falling up and down party lines. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true that it's not falling down party lines. I looked up the statistic this morning. I don't have them at my fingertips right now, but it's something like 44% of homeschooling families, identify as conservative, which means you have anywhere from 20 to 30% identifying as liberal or progressive, and 20 to 30% identifying as moderate. So it tilts conservative, but it's still a pretty clear bell curve where you're gonna get big groups of people identifying all across the board: conservative, liberal, progressive, libertarian, anarchist, Marxist, you name it. Uh, Often it's families that want to take the role of educating on for themselves, and that doesn't really have a political valence to it. You can come to that conclusion if you're an adherent of Marx or Friedrich Hayek. Like, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, an atheist or a Christian. This idea that the parents can, maybe should, or I will say can or should be the ones who educate their child, or at least fundamentally responsible for it. That's pretty ecumenical politically. Everyone can agree with that.
Well, and I think part of the reason that we've had such a support group come out for this particular show is that parents are saying, like, we're not monolithic, so we don't necessarily fall into a perfect group, and so we may not like one thing about the way that our kids are getting educated, and therefore we'll take them out of the system and do it ourselves. So Ashley, that at least to my next question is, when did you pivot? When did you pivot and say, okay, yes, my son is on the spectrum. I've given him enough coping mechanisms. He's able to function now. I'm going to put him back into in-person. Maybe your younger sons were better prepared for a myriad of reasons. So when did that shift happen for you? Did you just follow your gut? Did you feel like you had them tested? I mean, what did you go through?
Sure. That's a great question. So every year I would, at the end of the year, which, because we did follow a pretty typical school year schedule, I would take all of the things that were important to me and grade them and say, okay, how important are these to me? How important are these things, not to me? And every single year we would just fall back into homeschooling. It was one of those things, is like, as silly as it is, you had some things that were really important, and then some things like, I hate making lunches. I hate it. and those are things that weigh heavily on your sanity sometimes, and it can be more important than other things. Being able to travel, that was really important. But then you put your own desires aside, and that's, parenting is very sacrificial, self-sacrificial, and you have to say, okay, what is best for our kids right now? And our oldest, who, like I said, is on the spectrum, we were doing really well with homeschooling, but it got to the point where I was going, I think he doesn't believe me when I tell him how hard he is going to need to work, and again, we were never committed to homeschooling forever. It maybe not, maybe we'll go back to it. We're open, we're flexible, but it was one of those things that we thought, okay, I think it's time that social pressure and a positive and a small school with the right environment would be really beneficial to him, because he's a bright kid and he needs to learn to work a little harder, right?
Yep.
So to see what other kids are doing that you can't see when it's just your little brothers, or even in a co-op situation where it's just not set up exactly the same way a traditional school is set up. So it really boiled down for us for that it was going to be the most beneficial thing for him. And let me tell you, we are 4 weeks in and he's learning. And every once in a while, the best thing that your kid can learn is to fail. And that's a hard lesson as a parent, to allow your child to just go, okay, dude, now you got to really rise to the occasion. And these are, skills that you have to learn as an adult. And you have to sit back and go, okay. And again, we don't know. Is this forever thing? Is he going to want to go off to boarding school one day? I don't know. We'll see what happens. So I think being flexible and allowing your kids and engaging your kids and saying, hey, what do you guys think? Do you still like this? Because our kids honestly were like, we love homeschooling. This is great. We don't want to have to put, clothes on, a uniform on every single day. That was oh my goodness. They were not looking forward to that. So, but they're loving it now. So
what the theme that keeps on popping up in my head is, okay, if we've already doubled and we're at almost 4 million post pandemic. So I'm actually a little bit worried about the kids that are getting invested. Parents are investing in them, whether or not they're homeschooling or at school choice, they're sending them to other schools. Daniel, are we going to start to see really some socioeconomic shortfalls here where we see kids fall behind? I mean, I am grateful that if I needed to, I would take it on. I would, less like Ashley, I'd have to make sacrifices and I'd have to invest, but I have the resources and not everybody does. So I'm sort of sitting back thinking to myself, well, shoot, where do we go from here?
I don't think that's the case. First of all, I don't want to make an enemy out of someone educating any child well, however that happens, right? If either of you have the privilege of being able to homeschool your kids, that's more education happening. I'm not going to hate on that, because that's education happening. That's a good thing. I kind of alluded to the research before on what school choice does to traditional public schools. And I'm going to come back around to it. The word in the literature is called competitive effects, which is essentially, right now, in our current system, in a lot of ways, our public monies fund failure. So if a public school is doing poorly, they get even more money, right? We send more and more and more money to the schools that are doing the worst. We end up subsidizing failure. And what do you get more of when you subsidize it? Whatever you're sending the money to. So if we're sending more money to failure, we're going to get more of that. What school choice does is it applies market pressure and competition, and public schools start to see their bottom line getting threatened and start making some of these changes, right? You can go to a school board meeting and shout into the mic for 3 minutes, and that school board doesn't really have to listen to you. They don't have to do anything. The only pressure they feel is electoral, and their low turnout elections. The unions can get all of their teachers to turn out. The people on that board have no incentive to listen to parental frustrations. But all of a sudden, if parents can leave and they can go to a charter school, they can go to a homeschool, they can go to a part-time in-school, part-time homeschool, like these new models that are showing up, all of a sudden the public school has to, get their ducks aligned and start doing a better job. So what we're seeing is public schools, the more choice there is, the more charter schools there are, the better these public schools become. So it's actually the exact opposite of what your worry is. As more people choose homeschooling or any kind of, other schooling option, we're going to see those schools get better, not worse.
Okay, Ashley, you're shaking your head. I mean, are you living proof of that? I mean, you made the decision back in 2020. I mean, we're approaching 2026, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I do want to speak to the idea of Ed Choice, because we have a scholarship here in Ohio called the Ohio Ed Choice Scholarship. And one of the things that we love most about the school that our kids are in is how diverse it is, not just skin color, but socioeconomic diversity, because this scholarship covers 100% of the tuition for these kids. It is absolutely incredible. And we have, I love it. It's just like, I didn't want to send my kids to a school that was just going to be all rich white kids. Like, to be perfectly honest, like I want my kids to have friends like I have from every walk of life. And it's incredible. And I think there needs to be more of that. And I know that's not happening in every single state. I've talked to friends who are in other states that they're going, man, I wish we had that. But every single kid does get money. Our kids got money from it, which we were like, wow, this is amazing. I'm happy to see a little bit of my tax dollars coming back to, since we haven't, been utilizing any of it at all. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree that it does make the schools more competitive. I see, we have seen just mass amounts of misappropriation with funding of money from the federal government within our school district. We, in 2022, 2023, our school district took COVID funds and turned 25 certified teachers into social workers. Yep.
So what in that case, did you see parental involvement? Like, what happened? Did it make headlines? Do we see it?
Nope. The news wouldn't cover it. We were really noisy about it. I helped to run a school board campaign. I was not the candidate myself.
Right.
And we had, a lot of community support, but the district, and to tell you, to speak to the level of corruption within the district, our superintendent, who just recently retired, but then was rehired in another position, so he's double dipping on salary. He actually, because of the small group of people that I'm a part of the amount of public participation at board meetings, he actually removed public participation. So he changed it to be on agenda items only. And of course, he controls the agenda, and you must submit 24 hours ahead what you're going to say so he can approve it or not. So not everybody gets to speak at school board meetings anymore in Dublin, Ohio.
So but Daniel, like that, to me as a parent, I don't live in Dublin, Ohio, obviously, but if it's happening somewhere, it's happening other places. I think how did we get here? Is it just too much policy, that there's too much bureaucracy? Why aren't we just focusing on what our kids are learning? From a parent, to me, that sounds so disheartening.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on what's going to help students learn. Kind of on the drums that I'm always banging, which is a bit tangential to our discussion right now. But a lot of the research coming out of schools of education, the teacher prep that happens in schools of education, is really ineffective. I mean, you look at reviews of the syllabi, what are the teachers learning? One of the most assigned books is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's by a Brazilian Marxist named Paulo Freire. I'm looking through syllabi right now on my own report. It's not out yet. But in one school, out of 12 classes, one of them was about phonics. One was about classroom management, but it was the kind of like, we're not going to do any consequences approach to classroom management, which, newsflash to anyone who has kids, that doesn't work. And then all the rest of them were ideology. They were very political. They were kind of a glorified degree in progressive politics. So the school board members, the teachers, the union leaders, the administrators, they're all kind of bought into a worldview, a vision, an ideology that isn't focused on educating kids. Or if it is, it's going to follow ineffective practices. It's going to focus on SEL instead of math. It's going to ask, well, how would you do this long division, instead of just showing the kid how to do it? It's going to let them pick their own books, whatever they want, be it, Diary of a Wimpy Kid or the latest comic that came out, instead of giving them great works of literature. So I bring a lot of that fault goes back to the schools of education, where you're getting shoddy research, where you're getting bad teacher prep. It's kind of the source of a lot of our educational woes.
So Ashley, as a parent, what could you do to empower those who are listening? What are you going to do going forward? Because it sounds like there is a lot of red tape, especially where you're living, and other parents listening may say, we have a similar situation here. We're facing the same thing. We feel like we're not being listened to as parents, and we attend these meetings, but there's an agenda, so we can't ask questions that are coming up organically. You can't be the only person who is sitting and invested in their children and feeling some of these struggles.
I hear this from parents in our district all the time this very question: what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're good. We have charter schools here that are free, that are, have incredible. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hillsdale curriculum, but fantastic curriculum. It's merit and character based, classical education, and it's free. It's completely free. You can send your kids, no problem. And there's not a lottery for it at this point, which is mind boggling to me that we don't have so many children in these schools yet. It's just, I can't, it's amazing to me that we're just happy to send them off to the school district every single year. But there is this complacency, this apathy on the parents' part. And I'm this is why I probably don't get invited to a lot of parties, but I speak very honestly about the fact that people are very happy to send their kids off every single day, not worry about what they're learning. And here's the thing, even if you love the agenda that is coming through the school district, be involved. Like, ask what your kids are learning, know what's going on. You shouldn't just send your kid off and just be like, oh, thank God my kid is gone, I can go play tennis or whatever you're doing. I don't know, maybe you're going to work. You have to be involved, and don't give them a screen at night. Like, just don't. You can do other things. Talk to your kids, engage your kids, find out what's going on. Play games, read books, get outside, touch grass. Like, there are things that you can do. But when it comes to being a parent in a district like this, you have, like, pull your kids, and the money will follow. And it's okay. Like, don't be afraid. If you need somebody to back you up, find me on social media. I will cheer you on all day long and give you resources on how to do it, whether you want to homeschool or if you want to find a charter school or a private school. And again, there are resources in every single state for scholarships to be able to, for your kids to attend. Most of them are income based. So, there are just ways to do it if you want to do it. But that's the question. How bad do you want to do it?
Right. How bad do you want it? Daniel, I think my last question to you would be, you've been watching this, you're an author. These are trends that you've noticed since you wrote the book and essentially long before that. Are we headed in the right direction? Are we seeing improvement? Because like you said, we're not going to focus on necessarily, and I don't want to criticize something like the teachers union, because I want the teachers to feel valuable, especially, that I'm trusting them. Right. And I'm not sure if just pointing at one thing, like you said, policy or unions or class sizes is the right thing. So, do you feel like all this attention is a good thing?
Yeah, I do actually think we're heading the right direction, and I'm kind of a chronic pessimist. I'm always, a bit of a curmudgeon out there, and everything's going wrong. But right now, I'm feeling hopeful. There's a lot of just silly things in public education. The latest one that I've encountered a lot is no zeros grading, right? Where even if the kid turns in no homework, we're going to give them a 50%. Yeah, it's like 50% of schools have incorporated something like it. But
Can I
so
get that
many
in
more
life?
teachers,
Can I get if I just don't show up, can I get a no zero? Like, can I still get paid?
yeah, get half of my paycheck. That'd be great.
That'd be great.
I hope my boss is listening to this. But more people are standing up and just saying, no, that's silly. We're not going to do that. And they're not kind of going along and smiling and nodded because they don't want to be in the fly in the ointment. They don't want to be the unpopular parent. There are more teachers, there are more parents, there are more admin, there are more just good-willed citizens out there saying, this is ridiculous. Let's do something sensible. Let's bring back the SS common sense, bring it up. It seems to have sunk over the last 5 years. Let's re-raise it, and let's get back focused on the basics of phonics, grading, reading good books, what's actually going to help kids in schools, and not just the latest fad that kind of is grabbing headlines.
Ashley, before I let you go, I want to give you the last word. I want to know, like, your big takeaway, what you learned from your experience. You've done it all. I think we're offering this resource to parents who are saying, wait, politics is making life so complicated, and we're the real majority. And what I get is empowerment from you. I think obviously there are local things going on in your district that are nuances that people are probably seeing. So they might be saying, okay, I don't live in Dublin. I may not have that, but I'm really struggling with what my son just brought home. He turned in blank homework. He's in 5th grade and he still got a 50%. That's not teaching him life lessons, right? So kind of blue sky it for me. What was your experience like? And would you say to parents out there, you could do it too?
Absolutely. And in fact, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
How about that?
I come from a working poor family. I grew up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Academics were very important to my family, but I didn't grow up in a district that, I was from Horry County. Like, this is like one of the worst districts in the United States, right? So I didn't grow up receiving like the best education of my life. I put myself through school twice, but engaging your kids, paying attention, asking questions, seeing how they're doing, and not to this point of like, oh, our kids are going to drive every decision that we make, because you make a decision as a family unit. You're the adult, they're the child, right? But you can absolutely do this. It is the kind of thing that is so crucially important. You get one shot with your kids. And I speak to the camera. If you're listening, there's one opportunity. It goes by so quickly, and you want to set them up for the best possible outcome. And whatever that is, and I'm not necessarily a big, you have to go to college. I have two that really, one that wants to be a farmer and one that wants to be a business owner. And that's fine. Whatever you want to do it with all you've got. And you don't have to come from a lot of money to do it. You don't have to have parents who are highly educated to do it. You have to have people who are willing to do it. And it is super self-sacrificial. You will be tired. You will be frustrated. You will have moments where you have to walk away. You'll have 6th grade math that makes you cry. There are moments, and I don't necessarily have I have a small community, but I don't have that. I don't have a mom who's swooping in to rescue me so that I can go take a nap or do whatever I need to do, go get my hair done. I've taken my kids to all the things that I've ever done. And it's just, I can't encourage parents enough. If you're a single parent, it can be done. If you're a working parent, it can be done. Look at it with maybe a slightly different lens, see what opportunities are there. You can, again, look into co-ops, look into charter schools. There are so many resources out there. And I know that, like I said, I'm always happy to answer questions as people have them, whether it's encouraging them or helping them kind of look into different Facebook groups. You can find homeschool Facebook groups or charter school Facebook groups, or all of these things exist. You just got to go looking for them.
Well, I'm grateful for both of you. I really am. I think this is such a great resource for families out there. And we do a myriad of conversations, so I'm certain that we'll probably invite you both back on. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.